I've said it 100 times on and off this channel, but it bears repeating. I love shoot-'em-up games. I love them so much that I actually broke my shmup list into 2 parts. This list covers all the best shmups where you play as a ship or a plane, and the other list, which will annotate on screen at the end of the video, covers all the best shmups where you play as a person with a gun. So which 2D ship-based shoot-'em-ups do I think are best? Let's find out. As always, we're only taking 1 entry per franchise, so don't expect to see 5 games in the same series just listed out. Other than that, I'm free to pick and choose at my leisure. Now let's get started. Hey, I'm AsaiNeroTran, and these are my top 10 shippity shmups. Pew pew! Let's kick things off with a tried and true classic. Space Invaders was and is an amazing shooter that essentially created the genre. You, as the player, have no vertical movement. All the enemies slowly move down the screen, and it's your job to blast them before they reach the bottom. As you destroy enemies, the remaining ship's descending speed increases incrementally with each enemy downed. This added challenge created real joystick-gripping tension to each Space Invaders session, and players around the world flocked to their local arcades to pour money into Space Invaders machines until they burst. Fun fact, the increasing enemy speed was totally an accident. Enemies moved slower when their numbers were greater because the custom hardware was unable to run the game properly, meaning there was lag. But as you destroy enemies, you actually free up the processor, which is why the game quote-unquote speeds up. In actuality, the game just slowly stops lagging and begins moving at the intended speed. This is one of the best accidents in the history of gaming, because it essentially made Space Invaders one of the few games that got more difficult as you progressed, aka it was one of the first games that had distinctly different levels. All of that led to the creation of what we now know as the high score system, as Space Invaders also added the ability for individual players to save their scores, which let everyone compete to get the top score at their local arcades, and boom, that was a bonus fun fact. Every other game on this list owes its existence to Space Invaders, and to leave it off this list would be absolute blasphemy. 9. Here's one of my personal favorites. I've already mentioned Sol-Feace in my top 10 most addicting games video, but beyond that, Sol-Feace is one of the best games on the Sega CD. It may be unassuming in its outward appearance, but tight controls and smooth gameplay really put this one over the top. Couple that with giant bosses with multiple moving parts, which was made possible due to the extra storage space and processing power brought by the CD add-on, and you have a really great shooter that challenges your thumb fidelity. While Sol-Feace doesn't really reinvent the genre, it definitely masters it. 8. Another classic game in the annals of history, Asteroids is one of the most popular games of all time. The game featured vector graphics, wraparound screen bounds, which means that objects that fly out one side of the screen fly back onto the opposite side of the screen, and even momentum, which is applied to every object in game, including the player's ship. Your goal is to blast all the space objects and rack up a high score, but there's more to the game than just asteroid blasting. Enemy UFOs that get increasingly difficult to deal with as you progress through levels, fragmenting asteroid bits that clutter up the screen and negate your maneuverability, the capacity to jump into hyperspace, which basically warps you into a random position on screen, which could be totally useful but could also totally kill you, and the ability to enter your initials when you get a high score added a lot of appeal to the game. In fact, Asteroids was wildly popular pretty much everywhere, and arcade owners that had Asteroids sometimes had to install larger coin boxes in their Asteroid machines because of the game's ridiculous popularity. The game was so popular that it spawned a league of unofficial Asteroid clone games, and Asteroids was even featured in other popular media, such as Wreck-It Ralph and The Simpsons. It goes without saying that Asteroids' popularity and quality were out of this world, and to this day, it's still one of the most addicting shoot-'em-ups on Earth. 7. The Raiden games were a time-tested shoot-'em-up series, and there's plenty of debate on which one's the best. To us, Raiden Fighter's Jet encompasses everything that makes the shmup genre great. The Raiden Fighter spin-off series brought so much to the table, and Jet was the culmination of all that great content. Loads and loads of stackable power-ups, different playable ships with different stats, giant bosses, and an overall campy feel, all of which lends itself towards the greater appeal of the game. Originally released in 1998, Raiden Fighter's Jet was too hardcore for home consoles. While everyone at home was starry-eyed over polygons, arcade shmup fans got this awesome game to sink more quarters into night after night. The gameplay is so smooth and responsive, and no matter how much action is on screen, there's never any lag, which is important because you can't really play a bullet hell shooter without the best of control fidelity. Much like Sol-Feace, this one might have fallen under a lot of people's radars, but trust me on this, Raiden Fighter's Jet is legit. 6. If you are even remotely into shoot-'em-up games, then you have definitely heard of R-Type. R-Type, much like the other classics to the genre, brought its own unique features, this time in its new weapon system, which gave players more than just a steadily improving pea shooter. R-Type's weapons feature charge attacks and a secondary pod that assists in destroying enemies, and the pod also has variable attack types for dealing with different enemies, such as enemies on the ground or shooting diagonally. R-Type was so good that it was ported to over a dozen systems, including the ZX Spectrum, the TurboGrafx 16, the Xbox 360, and even the Game Boy. Now that is a damn good shmup. 5. Earlier we talked about how great Space Invaders was, and Namco must have realized how great Space Invaders was too, because they released their own Space Invaders clone/competitor that garnered a lot of popularity called Galaxian. But out of Galaxian's money bag came a sequel, in our number 5 entry, Galaga. Galaga was not just a worthy successor to the Space Invaders and Galaxian craze. As a standalone game, Galaga did so much to engage you as a player. Enemies flew into the level in waves, sometimes dropping bombs to try and take you out before you can even get comfortable. Instead of floating and dropping bombs from above like its predecessors, Galaga's enemies bring the fight to you, dive bombing and regular bombing with steadily increasing hostility. Later levels see enemy ships transform into other styles of enemy ships, which can split off into multiple smaller ships that have to be dealt with differently than the original ship. And there's even an enemy ship that can capture your ship and turn it against you, but if you manage to snipe the capturing ship out of the air when it swoops in, you can reclaim your ship and have double blasters. And you're gonna need the twin guns, because the game features bonus levels which award you extra points and maybe even an additional ship if you perform well enough. If Space Invaders invented the wheel, Galaga invented the bicycle. There's a reason why Galaga is one of the faces of the golden age of arcades. 4. Another shmup that might have fallen under a lot of people's radars, Gun-Nac on NES is one hell of a shoot-'em-up game. Remember how we said Raiden Fighter's Jet was super dope as a responsive and challenging bullet hell shooter? Well, Gun-Nac not only did the bullet hell shooter before Jet, Gun-Nac did it on the NES. Multiple distinct power-ups, pixel-perfect controls, and that perfect level of difficulty that draws you in for another go-around are all present in Gun-Nac. But it doesn't stop there. Gun-Nac also gives you difficulty settings like easy, intermediate, hard, and you can change the way the game functions by adding a ricochet to your bullets that can take you out, creating even more dangerous situations for the truly hardcore shmup fans out there. This customizability adds so much replay value to Gun-Nac, and overall, Gun-Nac is just as good as all its contemporaries that are synonymous with the genre. Hell, Gun-Nac may even be the best shoot-'em-up game on the NES. 3. UN Squadron has a special place in my heart. As I mentioned in our top 10 comic book/manga games video, UN Squadron was based on an anime called Area 88, and it features arguably the best shoot-'em-up gameplay on the SNES. UN Squadron was one of the first home console games to feature multiple playable ships, but unlike other shooters, UN Squadron made you earn them. You start off with some money, and you earn money based on how well you do in each level, and then you take that money and spend it on your ships, power-ups, weapons, etc. It really makes you feel empowered as you progress and improve because you can only be as good as you earned through gameplay. This adds a lot of depth and replayability to the game as well. Do you save up for that big power-up or upgrade, or do you spend it now to make it through the next level a little bit easier? It's up to you to decide, and UN Squadron embodies the idea of the SNES putting the power in your hands. And as I said before, that music is just amazing. I'll let it play out before the transition to number 2. Everybody watching this had to know Gradius was going to be on here somewhere. But which Gradius do we put? Gradius 1 was so beloved and introduced fans to the famous Konami code and was arguably the best NES shmup of all time. And Gradius 3 brought the series to Super Nintendo, which allowed players to customize the selection bar on top of further tightening the controls, which is definitely necessary due to the merciless difficulty. But for us, we're going to throw down the last original console Gradius game, Gradius 5. The customizable selection bar returns in the form of the weapon array, the gameplay is polished to its absolute finest, allowing for precision controls at each and every moment. There's a score attack mode that features online leaderboards, which is a huge deal on the PlayStation 2, and look at these gorgeous PS2 era graphics! Plus, Gradius 5 brings many welcome additions to the gameplay first seen in the Salamander spin-offs, including immediate respawn without having to restart the entire level. This keeps the game fast and fluid, which is great, because Gradius 5 is also really hard. While most people remember and love Gradius 3, especially for its difficulty, Gradius 5 presents a high level of challenge while remaining accessible for newer players. If Gradius 5 is the last original console Gradius game we ever get, then the franchise went out with a bang. Because to us, Gradius 5 is the best game in the series. But it's still not quite good enough to fly into that number 1 spot. Alright, let's blast through this recap before we get to our number 1 entry. Number 10, Space Invaders. Number 9, Sol-Feace. Number 8, Asteroids. Number 7, Raiden Fighter's Jet. Number 6, R-Type. Number 5, Galaga. Number 4, Gunneck. Number 3, UN Squadron. And number 2, Gradius 5. Let me take you back to the 90s. There were a whole slew of phenomenal shooters, and many of them had one thing in common. They were developed by a company called Treasure. On the Sega Saturn, Treasure developed one of the finest 2D shooters of all time with one of the coolest names of all time, Radiant Silvergun. A culmination of everything the developers had learned in the shoot-'em-up genre, Radiant Silvergun's controls and game feel are just perfect. Like UN Squadron, Radiant Silvergun gives you the power of choice, but instead of making you buy weapons, you had 7 weapons available at any given point. This lets you play with whatever weapons you want, but for maximum effectiveness, specific enemies are weak to specific weapons, and choosing the right weapon for the job is part of the challenge of the game. You can chain enemy kills together to score bonus points, and if you manage to beat the level and boss within a time limit, you get bonus points as well. This makes it easier to upgrade all your weapons, which in turn makes it easier to chain enemies together and take out the bosses and earn more points to earn more upgrades. It all fits together so well. Fast forward a little to the Dreamcast, and you get the spiritual successor to Radiant Silvergun, Ikaruga. Ikaruga is just as phenomenal as Radiant Silvergun, but as a game, it's almost the complete opposite. Instead of getting 7 weapons right off the bat, Ikaruga only gives you 2 throughout the entire game. There are still no power-ups, but you can upgrade your special attack by absorbing enemy bullets. How do you absorb enemy bullets? By using Ikaruga's trademark polarity system. You have to change the polarity of your ship between white and black, which changes the halo around your ship and indicates which bullets you can absorb. You'll need to master this polarity system, because Ikaruga is the bullet hell shooter to end all bullet hell shooters. And Ikaruga has so much replayability as well, including solo stages that allow you to practice stages you've already unlocked, and even a quote-unquote pacifist mode called Bullet Eater, wherein you don't fire a single shot and simply navigate stages by changing polarity. Because Radiant Silvergun and Ikaruga are both equally good and not necessarily related, we're gonna call it a tie. By no stretch of the imagination do we say that Radiant Silvergun and Ikaruga are perfect 2D shoot-'em-up games. They are utterly and completely perfect. If you love shoot-'em-ups, go play these now. Be sure to check out our other top 10 shmup list, Top 10 Shootity Shmups, where we cover the best run-and-gun shoot-'em-up games. It's annotated on screen right now for your convenience. But before you go, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell, and give us a like. Thanks!